that you shouldn't drive your car until you know how your body's going to react to this drug. How many people actually don't drive their car? I mean, everybody's just taking these drugs. They're out there on the road, and they're oftentimes not even realizing what they're doing. But the last thing I just wanted to ask you, when you were suffering those side effects, you had access to the pharmaceutical cartels. Did you ever try to go to any of the insiders and ask them about the
No,
side
I was
effects
told I was
experiencing?
completely crazy for thinking that I was having these side effects, that this was all a part of my own personal genetic defective brain. That was what I was told. So, and doing my research, then I uncovered all of this information that I disclose in my book. This isn't my original research, They don't tell sales reps on the front lines talking to doctors the truth either. I mean, they have to... Sales reps are sold down the river more than anybody else because they have to be convincing to the doctors. So there is a huge propaganda, a huge training session and brainwashing session that takes place before a rep is ever released into the field to try to talk to a doctor. And then once you're in the field talking to doctors, you're pretty much a mockingbird for marketing. We stand toe-to-toe and knee-to-knee, and we learn role-playing. You're the doctor, I'm the rep. Now I'm the rep, or now I'm the doctor, now you're the rep. And they go down the line, and they do that until they can regurgitate exactly what pharma wants them to say without deviation that will get them in legal trouble.
And you also talk about in your book how they actually... or maybe it was on your YouTube video, which is also excellent, but you talk about how they actually do personality profiles on the various doctors and find what the doctor's most interested in. This one's interested in prestige, this one's interested in sports, and you actually target them based on the investigation they've done of the doctor, correct?
Absolutely, and not only that, you go even further. You're trained how to identify personalities. If this is an analytical doctor, you want to approach him with clinical data. If this is a driver, you want him to be the person leading the conversation so that he doesn't feel like try to get him to teach you something and you get the information in that you need him to know in that manner. They actually teach you how to be most effective in selling to the doctor. This is a sales job, and this is a job that is to make money. And pharmaceutical sales is in the business of disease maintenance and symptoms management. If I can't convey anything else to the general public, the thing that I'm trying to convey is that you are counting on your doctors and the pharmaceutical industry to heal you, and that is not their agenda, and it is not in their best interest.
And what are you taught to tell the doctor if the doctor should actually ask about side effects?
We are taught to minimize them. What you're supposed to minimize the doctor's concern and handle it in a way that will still make him prescribe your products, him or her.
And what kind of financial incentives, shall we say, do you offer the doctors?
Well, it really depends.
To your brand?
Yeah, it really depends. Now, I started in the industry in 1985 and left in 2000, so there was a little bit back then. I mean, we were doing outrageous things with our expense accounts and stuff. And then, of course, the pharmaceutical industry came up with their own little regulatory system where you're not supposed to spend over $25, on any individual doctor unless it pertains to education. Well, what they started doing then is just funneling all of their money out of entertainment expense accounts into continuing medical education, and then providing these very nice dinners at, the 4-star, 5-star restaurants, doing things like sending, doctors to sporting events and flying them here or there to have a round table discussion. But very often the money that changes hands these days is done under the guise of education. That is exactly how it's presented, because then everybody assumes that, well, of course we have to have our opinion leaders in the medical community out educating their juniors and, their colleagues and all this and that, and it's not perceived as the sales job that it actually is. There was an excellent article called Dr. Drug Rep. I don't know if you saw that just came out in the New York Times. But if you didn't, I'll have to share that with you, where a psychiatrist actually is talking about how he was utilized as a sales rep. In other words, if a doctor, an opinion leader, is put in front of a group of other physicians, pharma will pay that doctor, but then that doctor is also provided with the materials, the slides, the information, all of the stuff that he's supposed to utilize in those talks. So you're not getting fair, balanced information from a physician when you go to one of those programs. You're getting pharma's marketing spin, but it's under the guise of a professional opinion leader's expertise.
Yeah, he's basically just a talking head.
Yeah, exactly what he is. And I mean, and we're talking big money, because I would pay local opinion leaders, say, $1,000 to have dinner with, invite their wives, and, you know, come with my husband to a nice location and meet them, and pay him $1,000 to sit down and have dinner and just have a round table discussion about my product with high volume prescribers, because that was more valuable to me than if I made, you know, calls for 6 months on them.
Yes, because they're going to be very grateful for that nice evening, and they're going to be very likely to prescribe the drug that you're suggesting. But do they actually, you know, I was never in this psych industry, and when I left medicine in the early 90s, it was before it had gotten as ridiculous as it is now. But do they actually give doctors, do they get some kind of a kickback for, you know, the numbers of drugs that they're prescribing, the number of patients or whatever?
In the older days, we did do that sort of thing. We would say, yeah, keep a list of, you know, the new starts that you have on this or that drug, and when I come in, I'll compensate you, you know, $25 per patient or something like that. But we usually, honestly, didn't have to do that to the doctors. You could do that with the nurses. You could do that with the staff in nursing homes or any of those kind of places, because they were making the recommendations to the doctors. So you had various ways that you could compensate financially for people to do things. But my biggie was I always had beautiful, wonderful, catered-in lunches where, I mean, they had ribbons tied around their silverware, and it was not, you know, Wendy's that I was bringing in. I had my own personal caterer that came in and did gourmet food. So I would very frequently drop, say, if I was calling on a cardiology office, for 2 minutes I might spend $250 to feed his staff.
Wow.
So there's some big money that's dropped, and doctors will tell you every day that does not influence their prescribing habits. But I want people to be aware that if it was not profitable for pharma to have those reps in there, they wouldn't. It would not make sense. The pharmaceutical industry is not a philanthropist in any way, shape, or form. They do nothing that does not affect their bottom line in a positive way.
Definitely not. And before the show we were speaking, and you were talking about what's going on with the SSRIs now. If you could just explain to the audience what you would discuss with me, and then I would like you to get back to Megan's story so that you can finish telling how these drugs devastated her life.
Well, I'm very alarmed at what I'm seeing. I have been a child advocate, and I have worked as a court-appointed special advocate in Texas in the foster care system. And I'm very alarmed at what I see them doing in terms of their tactics. I can identify pharma tactics from having been in the industry for 15 years, and they're very concerned right now that their SSRIs and SNRIs are getting all of this negative publicity. They're getting black box warnings. You know, a lot of them are also going off patent, so they're going to be coming out generically. That means they're going to suffer a huge loss in terms of income with those drugs. So they are quickly trying to move that patient population into the atypical antipsychotics like Abilify and Seroquel and Clozaril and all of those various atypical antipsychotic drugs. And they are vehemently marketing those things off-label, which is illegal to do, but they're doing it through their opinion leaders and, you know, through the ways that they can get around doing it. And that concerns me. I mean, it concerns me for our children especially, because when children get caught in the system in this country, they are invariably drugged. I have fought time and time again to keep 2-, 3-, and 4-year-old children that were in the system from being chemically abused, and it's almost impossible to do because it's the advocate's word or it's the caseworker's word against this so-called expert that is a psychiatrist, which is nothing more than a fake doctor, in my opinion.
definitely. And I had told you when we were speaking earlier about this book, Whores for the Court, by Sandra Hagen. It's a very important book that the listeners should get to read about how these psychiatrists come into the situation. They're court-appointed or whatever to evaluate these children. There's so many ways that they can cause these children damage, but of course any child that's involved in that situation is going to have emotional issues, because just going through the situation in court is very emotionally distressing. And so they put the child in a situation where any normal child would be upset, and then they give them a label, and just as you said, they start them on the drugs. And of course, they're basically using these children as guinea pigs, because these drugs have not even been studied in children. They're studying the children as they're doing these different evaluations. I know of one child that was given 6 different drugs, and this was a client of mine, and the mother actually called me, and it was like 2:30 in the morning on a Saturday evening going into Sunday. Her daughter was standing on a bridge in Syracuse and was ready to jump, because they put her on this cocktail of 6 drugs. They just started her up on all this stuff, this young woman that had never taken anything before. And of course, they have no way of knowing what the side effects are going to be. And then, of course, once she does something like that, then of course she's suicidal. And this was actually a few years ago, before they were even admitting that suicide was a side effect of many of these drugs. But I want you to get into that off-label situation. That is very important, because that's one of the most amazing things to me, that doctors can take a drug and just invent a use for it, and they're allowed to give the drug. But from what I understand, you're not allowed to tell them officially. You can just kind of like suggest it to them that some doctors have used such and such a drug for a condition that it hasn't been officially deemed appropriate by the FDA, correct?
Oh, exactly. And that is exactly how a pharmaceutical rep is trained to detail a drug off-label, is to name drop. You find who does that general practitioner or that particular physician send, what specialist, what psychiatrist does he refer his patients to? And then you get that opinion leader, that person that he admires or respects, to go and tell them that they're having success, or you just drop that person's name. Oh, well, by the way, Dr. So-and-so is having great success with ADHD with Abilify. Well, that's not detailing the drug according to the law, but that is giving him the information that his colleagues or someone that he respects and considers an opinion leader in the community is doing it successfully, and that opens the doorway for him to do so as well.
So please get back to Megan. Where we left off with her story was she was going off to school. She was pre-med, correct?
Right. She was pre-med. She ended up in the emergency room because of a drug interaction between her hydrocodone and ephedra. And again, she had already seen a physician because she was expressing that she was feeling depressed, because every time she would try to come off of the hydrocodone, she would experience a depressive episode. So those notes that were in the records, not a good, physical and history and all of that, were what determined that, or made her get the bipolar label. And anyway, they started her on a cocktail of drugs then, because not only did she need antidepressants, she needed mood stabilizers, and she needed this and she needed that. And she ran the gamut, just like, I can tell you, I don't want to say hundreds, but dozens of people that I have seen this exact same experience with. And what happened to her was that as soon as she, got the bipolar label, then they started increasing the drugs. The drugs didn't work. She'd react to the drugs. They didn't identify it was a reaction. They'd give her more drugs. And she just became an absolute, cesspool of chemicals. She couldn't function. She couldn't do anything. She became violent. Her personality was completely altered. She had been one of the most brilliant young women that I'd ever known. In fact, when she described to me what she was feeling like on her meds, she says, Aunt Gwen, I just feel like, I'm like seeing myself from a third-person omniscient point of view. You know what I mean? It's like I know everything that's happening, but I can't control anything. And I knew exactly what she meant, but I thought, how many people are intelligent enough to explain it to me in that manner? And this poor girl is being destroyed with these drugs, you know? And I knew exactly what she was talking about, which brings up the point that you did earlier. How many other